What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Braking system. There are no problems with ABS on the second generation S80. Anything in this system breaks rarely, and in most cases, the cause of the problem is either wiring to the block or the pump motor of the block. The system works roughly, it works early, but the braking distance is usually minimal, including on a snowy road. Brakes of the cars are powerful enough. On the most widespread versions with a motor 2.5 liters in front, there are discs on 316 or 336 mm, and the most powerful versions of S80 with motors 3.0T and 4.4 brakes got exactly the same. And the weakest brake system could be in cars with 1.6 liters motors and with atmospheric 2.0, their front discs are 300 mm. The diameter of rear discs on all cars is 302 mm. The calipers on all versions are as practical and modest as possible, single piston with floating bracket both front and rear. On cars before the first restyling with manual parking brake, there is a simple caliper at the rear, and in versions with electric drive with a screw mechanism of handbrake and gear motor installed directly on the caliper. The resource of all versions of brakes is high enough, and the first problems begin to appear in 8 years of operation or in case of gross errors of maintenance. At the same time, the design of the parking brake cannot be called ideal. Its manual drive has a complex mechanical part with a pedal and a gas stop. However, the drum mechanism of the brake itself is reliable, and if the gas stop is working, cables are not stretched and springs are not rotted, it does not cause troubles. But motor drives on versions with electric handbrake, especially on cars before the second restyling, are a real headache. Gear motors here are the same as on Volkswagen, but the Swedes were a little greedier, and the price of the original part was a little higher than the German one. And the quality is the same. There are also regular cracks from the ears of fastening and depressurization of the unit. The problem with the gear motors was corrected only by the end of the model production. In case of depressurization, the gearbox first starts to jam, making parking brake requires service errors and then simply fails. If it is not repaired in time, the caliper itself will suffer. Corrosion quite quickly kills the lightweight gland of the handbrake drive and the caliper housing. Now the price of Chinese gear motors is in the range from 4 to 12,000 rubles, and the original costs the same space 40 with more than 1,000. At the same time, on the Volvo with a minimum of modification fit motor reducers from Volkswagen, you only need to change the connector. Such remodeling allows you to save a significant amount. Front calipers are often changed to two-piston calipers from XC60. It is considered that since there are two pistons, the car will brake better. In fact, the pedal force simply decreases and the braking distance remains approximately the same. At the same time, in our conditions, the resource of two-piston calipers is less due to stronger dirtiness of dust covers. Detail original price of non-original 2 brake system front brake pads 25,964 Textar 8095 Bosch 6766 brake pads rear 6566 87103 Bosch 4334 brake disc front 315 by 28 mm 15748 812 223 Bosch 10013 brake disc rear 288 by 1234 543 86577 Bosch 7508 suspension. The suspension of the second generation S80 is both its virtue and curse. The thing is that it is similar to suspensions of budget Ford Mondeo and therefore combines a good resource and very low cost of maintenance. There are no complicated operations in the course of repair. There are cheap steel levers, replaceable ball bearings you can buy, all silent blocks for the front suspension and inexpensive levers for the rear. And at the same time, comfort and controllability are rather average. The car does not like low-profile tires with rigid sidewall and does not please with high quality of steering. Controllability of S80 is adjusted mainly on safety and convenience, and driving pleasure is still a secondary parameter. And there are no opportunities to change something seriously. Low springs, big wheels, wide tires, advanced shock absorbers, all this drastically reduces comfort, but very little increases driving qualities. Really, I don't know why Volvo needs them at all, but the new generation of buyers of these cars for some reason believes that it is possible to drive safely and aggressively at the same time. The front suspension lasts quite reliably for 100,000 miles. At the same time, sometimes there are complaints that the original shock absorbers on the front axle last the same 100,000 miles. Fortunately, the majority of more careful or not so fastidious owners can still drive more than 200,000 mileage, but under one condition: the corrugations must be in order and under it must be clean. Other replacements are expected. Support cushions and bearings themselves serve more than 100,000, and in most cases the wear at 100,000 mileage is noticeable. But urgent replacement is not necessary yet. Over time, the springs sag quite a bit, but they rarely break. But the silent blocks of the lever to this mileage wear out strongly and are unlikely to last longer without replacement. The ball bearing is conditionally eternal, but in case of what is changed quite easily, it is fixed on rivets. I should note that strong deterioration of comfort is connected mainly with sagging of supports of struts and wear of shock absorbers. And the majority of services do not see any malfunction in it. The front silent block of a lever here is put by pressing, and at mileage over 200,000 at the second-third replacement of an element. There are cases of loosening of its landing and displacement. Pay attention to such nuances. Repairability of the rear suspension is also on high. The upper crooked arm, as well as the small straight link, in most cases are replaced as an assembly, although there are separate silent blocks for it on sale. Wear is mainly subject to the longitudinal arm silents, which are also called butterflies, and, in fact, the springs, which can sag very strongly. Occasionally there is such a funny trouble as corrosion of longitudinal arms. They are steel and relatively thin-walled. The number of replaceable elements in comparison with the last generation S80 has decreased, but their cost in non-original version has decreased even more strongly. In comparison with 80 of the first generation or with Volvo 960, the price of even a complete reassembly of the suspension of S80 of the second generation seems quite sparing. Well, the resource before the first such reassembly is on average 80 to 120,000 kilometers if we are talking about cars from Moscow. Among the unpleasant features, I would like to mention the low life of the hub bearings. The situation is complicated by the fact that they are quite expensive and are replaced as a set with the hub. And at the back, also together with ABS sensor. Even a quality non-original bearing does not last very long because of high load. The wheel air treat should be kept within the recommended limits, otherwise the bearings, both front and rear, turn into a consumable. With a replacement period of 30 to 50,000 kilometers. Prices for details are quite biting. For the original want from 40 and more thousand rubles, and the upper boundary passes the mark of 100,000 rubles. Quality non-original bearings have grown in price up to 12 to 15,000. Steering the rack on all cars is hydraulic, but the booster pump can be different. Until 2011, it was mainly conventional mechanical. After the cars with all motors began to put an electric pump, there were complaints about both the rack and the life of the mechanical pump. Racks suffer from both knocking and leaks. In most cases, the cause is damage to the glands and side bushings due to corrosion or vibration. The unfortunate location of the rack is largely to blame. It is heated by the exhaust. And the clamping nut of racks without servotronic is plastic, and over time it simply breaks. The resource of side dust covers is frankly small, and their condition should be checked at each maintenance. The saddest thing is a difficult situation with second-hand racks. The choice is small, and prices and chances of need of new repair are high. The resource of the pump of the hydraulic pump is also small. It is considered that the reason of its fast wear lies in the pump material, but by and large materials here differ little from materials on other cars. But frankly, hot oil can really cause the pump to break down quickly. Electric pump is not inferior to mechanical pump in reliability, and if you change oil at least once in 30,000, it does not break down. Even if it is already humming, a double fluid change can help to correct the situation. The design of the pump is quite simple and can be repaired quite well. Leaking booster tubes are also almost certainly related to high oil temperatures in the system. Leaks are relatively common in cars with a conventional mechanical pump. I will give the traditional advice: put a bigger radiator for the power booster, for example, by replacing the tube with a finned oil radiator from UAZ. Transmission. General problems. Volvo's traditional misfortune is that the catalogue contains only complete drive assemblies. As a result, there is a lot of confusion with replacements, half of external ball joints and almost all internal tripods do not actually fit the car. Want to just buy and take a complete non-original drive? Thankfully, the price for them is still below $20,000. There is no sense to take the original drives. Their cost of $230,000 and more deprives the idea of any logic. And if there is time for selection of spline drives, it is possible to do with little blood. There are no problems with splines in front-wheel drive cars, and I will tell about problems of all-wheel drive transmission a little below. Manual transmissions. If you want to buy S80 with manual, then you are a great original, and I have bad news for you: there are very few such cars, and mostly they are variants with Ford motors. And the MTX75 and MMT6 series manual transmissions are not the worst boxes. They have no obvious problems with reliability, and the 2-mass flywheel causes questions. It is not cheap. Prices for non-original products start from 45,000 rubles, and the resource. It is like luck. It may go through 200,000 and it may start knocking at 30,000. It all depends on loads, driving modes, pollution and so on. If the transmission itself breaks down, it is easier to replace it as an assembly. Prices for spare parts are very high and complete. Boxes are in low demand, and second-hand units are quite affordable. Automatic boxes. Volvo S80 was sold mainly with automatics. The absolute majority of cars were equipped with a 6-speed Aisin TF80 SC, but with Ford 4-cylinder motors put in 6-speed pre. Selective Robot Series 6 DCT 450, and after 2014 in a pair with a 2-liter turbo engine stood an 8-speed automatic transmission Aisin TG81 LS. Automatic transmission TF80 SC is the same for all Volvo cars, and I have already told about it many times. You can read about this automatic transmission, for example, in the review of the Land Rover Freelander 2 Land Rover Freelander 2. And a little bit in the review of Volvo S60. Variants of this gearbox were put on a huge number of cars: Opel, Ford, Saab, Alfa Romeo, Fiat and PSA. The design of automatic TF80 SC is surprisingly compact. The box itself is even smaller than the old 5-speed 55-51, but a clever kinematic scheme allowed to greatly reduce the size of the gearbox without reducing its strength. However, the number of solenoids has increased to 8, and the requirements to the quality of their work have become higher. Any discrepancies in characteristics lead to a noticeable drop in the quality of shifts. S80 of the second generation received several variants of this automatic transmission. Until 2009, Volvo was equipped with a variant of the box with hydraulic blocks of the first revisions, with torque converter without torsional vibration damper and with a felt filter. Since 2010, the updated box can sometimes carry the index TF80 SD, but the boxes with the old designation are also modernized. The main changes have affected the design of the GDT, hydraulic block and filter. A torsional vibration damper has appeared in the torque converter, and the body and locking pads have been strengthened. The pads began to wear more evenly, and under regular high loads their life has increased significantly. The new revisions of the hydraulic block are definitely better, but they are still more finicky about oil quality than the final version from 2011. In 2010, a metal mesh for coarse filtration was added to the filter, and the paper diaphragm was placed so that it would not allow oil starvation even if clogged with wet products. In 2011, the hydraulic block was changed once again. It has become even more reliable, and its latest version has been much easier to work with darkened oil for some time. The two most loaded solenoids, GDT lock and linear pressure, last much longer. At the same time, we have improved sealing of the wiring gland. Now it sweats oil less, and chances of water getting into it are considerably reduced. Although it is still not recommended to wash the box from Kircher, the tightness of the control unit and connector is relatively low. The main enemy of this automatic transmission is overheating. Volvo cooling system with a compact water oil heat exchanger placed on the radiator turned out to be unviable in practice. Heat exchanger, at high loads and without oil change, literally in 3 years ceased to perform its functions, and on gasoline engines. The constant overheating quite quickly achieved the automatic transmission. On diesel cars at city modes of driving in summer, overheating was also quite often. Besides, on the first revisions of the control system, overheating of the oil was promoted by warping of the GDT locking package. At oil temperature over 120 degrees, the mechanism of delayed destruction of the unit was started, and just a few hours with oil temperature over 150 degrees could send the box to repair almost certainly. High temperature is harmful to any automatic transmission. Many rubber elements immediately lose their characteristics when overheated and become stiffer and more brittle. In conventional automatic transmissions, such elements are mainly the pistons of the packets, GDT oil seal, and internal seals of the hydraulic block. But on the TF80SC, the sealing rings of the main shaft, on which the drums C1 and C2 are located, are also very vulnerable. They have an extremely unfortunate design, and they were changed only in 2014. All older automatic transmissions have rings without labyrinth sealing of the joint and have a tendency to early wear. Even in normal use with mileage over 200 km, they would wear out with warranty and cause pressure drop and shocks, and overheating kills them immediately. If oil of WS type, less viscous than TIV, is used in the box, then slippage of C2 package is manifested at once. In this situation, it is better to immediately go to service on a tow truck, so as not to kill the mechanical part of the box. But even if the pressure has not dropped, it is too early to rejoice. Overheating makes not only the pistons and seal rings brittle, but also the plastic distance washers in the gearbox, also known as washers. They start to crumble, clogging the filter and damaging the bearings. This is the only weak point in the mechanical part of the box, except for rare cases of failure of thrust bearings. By the way, the latter have a plastic cage, and overheating is not good for them either. Characteristic symptoms of malfunctions are hard shifts 4, 5, 6, which usually indicates a pressure leak on the C2 drum, and hard shifts down to the second gear and up to the sixth gear, which indicates wear of the brake belt or lack of pressure. A completely dead automatic transmission can have more problems. The gearbox tries to drive to the last. It is often killed by attempts to delay the repair, which significantly increases its cost. Avoiding large expenditures is quite simple. First of all, it is necessary to provide normal thermal regime with oil temperature of 80 to 90 degrees. To do this, it is necessary to put an external radiator for the box. You can even leave the native heat exchanger, but you need to make sure that it is not clogged with deposits. And it is highly recommended to significantly reduce the intervals of oil change at least to 50,000 mileage, and in large cities. And on cars with powerful motors, even to 30. And the box definitely could use an external filter, especially for revisions before 2009. When the mileage exceeds 200,000, it is necessary to watch the oil darkening very carefully when the GDT locking linings wear down to the glue layer. It darkens instantly, and the wet products clog the filters and the hydraulic block almost immediately. In general, the box is quite reliable, and it is a pity that for replacement of sealing rings at mileage up to 200,000 it will almost certainly have to be opened. However, replacement of rings and filter, especially if there is a new GDT and a hydraulic block, will allow to drive before any problems appearing for another 200,000. Aisin TG81 LS box is very similar to its predecessor, but it warms up less. There is no problem with rings initially, and wear of GDT locking pads is very low. Oil in this automatic can serve much longer, but it depends on the load, and it is not worth to consider it eternal, of course. Especially in Moscow. According to the experience of using this box on other models, we can note relatively early wear of some friction packs, which was not observed on TF80. But early in this case is 200 with more than 1,000 mileage under unknown loads, so it is a bit early to draw conclusions about the presence of a structural problem. Most of the breakdowns are related to serious tuning of motors and banal overloading of the mechanical part. In my opinion, this is a very reliable automatic transmission. Curiously enough, the list of brands using boxes of this series was constantly expanding, and they were put on Toyota, Volkswagen, and even BMW Mini. But cars with a robot DCT 450 could not be found in Russia. However, the experience of operation of Ford with this box shows that it is not the most successful unit, and the price of its operation is noticeably higher than that of Volkswagen DQ250 due to more expensive clutch packages and damper device. Want more details? Read the material about Volvo S60 second generation all-wheel drive. All-wheel drive is realized traditionally. Angular gearbox and Haldex clutch on the rear axle. The angular gearbox is a headache when paired with both automatic and manual transmissions. The main problems with the gearbox are corrosion and wear of the intermediate shaft splines, as well as bearing failure due to lack or degradation of lubrication. The problem is aggravated by the absence of a factory maintenance schedule for the unit. Now problems with the gearbox are solved not only by its replacement. There are inserts for the spline part, bearings are selected, so if the gearbox housing is not damaged and the main pair is intact, the restoration will be relatively budgetary. In the case of versions of angular gear on cars with MKP, repair is a little more difficult due to the rarity of combining MTX 75 boxes with all-wheel drive, but the problems are also solvable. Well, the clutch is generally reliable, provided that the oil in it is changed regularly. Motors. General problems of the specific problems of the S80. It is possible to note a very unsuccessful underhood wiring of machines with all engines. Its insulation over time literally falls apart, and short circuits and corrosion lead to the failure of harnesses. Dense layout of radiators and not very successful fans, also quite traditional for Volvo shortcomings. There are no mass failures of fans and control units on the S80, but they still break down relatively often. Thin pipes and cooling pipes have to be replaced almost without fail. Supports of S80 engines are complicated and rather expensive. And it is also a tradition of the brand. In motors with electric drive of vacuum pump, and all motors after 2010, vacuum line tubes are rubbed. Gasoline motors. The main gasoline motors in Russia are the 2.5T and the 3.2-liter atmospheric engine. However, if you try hard, you can find cars with other motors, from Ford's 2-liter atmospheric engine to Yamaha's 4.4-liter motor. There are also Ford EcoBoost with volumes of 1.6 and 2.0 liters. There is no sense to consider features of 2.5 liters motors in detail again. I have already told about them repeatedly in reviews of other cars of the brand. Several variants of this motor were put on S80. The early B5254 T6 and B5254 T8 are minimally different from the motors already considered in the reviews S60, XC90, S70 and other models. But after 2010, modernized variants T10 and T11 appear. They are noticeably different from the earlier ones, which I have considered in previous reviews. But these differences don't have much effect on performance. The main changes are a new intake manifold, a different ECG system with the installation of an oil trap on the front wall of the block, new exhaust and turbines, new control units, new phase controllers, slightly lighter versions of the piston group and other optimization. In general, these are all the same motors, but with a slightly better timing and at the same time with a lot of problems with the ECG. And the list of main problems is the same: oil consumption and intake gassing due to VKG, low life of plugs and ignition modules and high chances of liner cracks between cylinders. The latter problem is the most unpleasant, as it requires liners or cylinder block replacement. The reason is most likely the following: high loads and detonation lead to increased loads on the liner, and the wall thickness in this area is minimal. The cast iron liner is thin-walled, and the aluminum layer is very modest. When the block overheats and loosening of the cylinder block gasket, antifreeze penetrates to the ends of the liners, which leads to corrosion of the liners. This weakens them and almost always results in cracks. Increase the chances of this type of breakdowns and errors in working with the block, uneven tightening of bolts and exceeding the tightening force. If the 2.5T motor has undergone chip tuning or the cylinder head has already been removed from it, it is not recommended to take the car without checking the liner with an endoscope and without controlling the volume of gases from the cooling jacket. In general, you should be careful with these motors, even if the mileage of the car is less than 100,000 kilometers. And keep an eye on the condition of the belts. The timing belt is often weakened by leaks of phaser regulators and leakage of their valves, which are located right on top of the motor. And also the design of the pulley at the destruction of the belt of the drive of attachments pulls the residue under the timing belt. The consequences are traditionally unpleasant. It is recommended to change the belt of additional units in advance, to put quality, and do not forget about tensioners. Engines with a volume of 3.2 litres are atmospheric, 6-cylinder, and are considered the most reliable on this car. Basically, these are motors of series B6324S and B6324S5. They differ minimally. The later ones have no GUR pumps, slightly differently assembled attachments, and the main differences of the engines depend on the year of manufacture of the motor. Over time, they have modernized timing gearboxes, generator drive clutches, and ECG. I have considered these motors in detail enough in the material about Land Rover Freelander 2. The main problems on the S80 remained exactly the same: not very successful gearbox in the timing drive, poor operation of VKG, very weak water oil heat exchanger. At normal service it is in general rather reliable motor, and resource of a piston group at it noticeably passes over 500,000 kilometers, but weak places nevertheless there are. Supercharged 3-litre motors, aka T6, and 4.4-litre V8 motors are vanishingly rare. There are no big surprises in them. T6 looks like a slightly complicated 2.5T, it has a different configuration of manifolds, 2 turbines and 6 cylinders. And there are no differences with the 2.5T in terms of reliability, list of major problems, and life expectancy. Yamaha's 4.4-litre engine in its later version is extremely reliable, but very expensive to maintain. If the latest revision of timing is installed, there are no problems with the bearings of the balancer shaft, injectors are alive. The resource of this motor is huge. But before buying a car with this engine, you should definitely learn about its features and check it in a specialized service. Motors from the Ford heritage are represented mainly by a supercharged version of the 2.0 EcoBoost motor. Atmospheric 2.0 and 1.6 EcoBoost are extremely rare. The 2-litre engine on the Volvo is completely similar to the Ford TPBA R9CB engines and is a development of the old Mazda 2.3 DC engine with minimal changes. There is a different piston, slightly modified cylinder head and intake manifold, different shape of windows, and installed a different intake. There are also minor differences in the timing. There are 2-phase adjusters, an upper chain slackener, and a more reliable tensioner. The injectors and ramp on the Volvo are also their own, but the fuel injector is almost the same as on the Ford. Unlike the 2.0 to 2.5 atmospheric engines, these engines have a closed block, but the liners are also thin-walled and steel. Unfortunately, almost all of the negativity regarding the engines of the Mazda CX-7, the main problem is detonation and weak pistons, combined with very shoddily written firmware. The main problem is detonation and weak pistons combined with very shoddily written firmware. Detonation control was virtually non-existent in these motors, and even when the firmware had already been updated on the Ford, it remained problematic on the Volvo. Given that the differences between turbo engines and their atmospheric variants are minimal, problems with weak crankshaft liners, low life of timing and piston group are quite expected. The liners are corroded, the timing gear wears quickly, and the recommended low viscosity oils do not help to increase the life of timing and liners. In addition, there is a problem with the thin-walled steel manifold burning through, causing pieces of its inner lining to break the turbine. This problem has been present on Mazda motors as far back as Mazda, and it still persists today. The good thing is that for these motors there are all-iron Chinese manifolds that solve the problem drastically. The intake also causes a lot of trouble. The supercharging pressure is high, and the life of the intake pipes and even the intercooler is offensively low. They were often replaced even during the warranty period. And anywhere of the turbine pressure control valve increases the chances of such failures to very high. Unfortunately, the supercharged 2-litre EcoBoost is far from the most successful motor. It pleases only with comparatively budgetary repair, simplicity, and low fuel consumption. Otherwise, it is an unambiguous failure, especially in comparison with the motors developed by Volvo itself. Diesel versions of the S80 were not officially sold in our country, and they simply cannot be bought. If you really want to learn about them, see the review Volvo XC60 where the necessary series of 2.4-litre diesels are considered in detail. To take or not to take? Volvo S80 of the second generation should not be bought casually. This car does not tolerate anything spontaneous. You need to know whether you need a large Swedish ship with a very good and comfortable interior, but very specific controllability. Will you like its reliability, which is surprisingly combined with rare but expensive breakdowns? Do you like compromises? If yes, you can try to find a common language with S80. For this purpose, you will have to try to find a worthy copy. Unfortunately, the S80 of this generation rots no worse than the previous one, so do not believe the shiny body and plastic. There may be unpleasant surprises under the bottom and under the covers. Moreover, the cars of the last years of release may have no less rust than the earliest ones. Age does not guarantee anything here. With boxes everything is somehow easier. We have almost no cars with robots, and ASIN automatic transmissions in general are not the worst. If, of course, they were not killed by overheating and dirty oil by previous owners. From motors it is better to avoid Ford EcoBoost. These are the most unsuccessful engines of S80. Atmospheric 2.0, of course, guarantee cheap service, but S80 with them is not real. In most cases, the choice is reduced to 2.5T or 3.2. Well, and when checking the car, it can be recommended to go to a specialized service where they know well the peculiarities of Volvo. The design of the car has many nuances. If you buy an initially problematic car, the cost of bringing it to life can be very upsetting. In conclusion, the Volvo S80 II presents a unique blend of luxury and performance, but it is not without its challenges. The issues surrounding hot boxes and the self-destructing supercharged EcoBoost engine serve as a reminder of the importance of thorough research and maintenance. For potential buyers, understanding these pitfalls can lead to a more informed decision, ensuring that the driving experience remains as enjoyable as the car's elegant design. As always, staying proactive with maintenance can help mitigate these concerns and keep the S80 II running smoothly for years to come. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more insights on automotive topics.